Yes, then we'll head over to our next presenter, Daniel. Welcome, Daniel, and welcome to Func Prog Sweden.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're also, I will say good morning to you, as you're also sitting in New Zealand.
Yes, yeah. It's the morning here, so morning sun.
Hmm?
Yeah,
Nice. So head over to, yeah, thanks.
yeah. So hi. So thanks again for having me at this meetup. Yeah, just like Marek, I'm here starting my day in New Zealand, and yeah, we actually both often or sometimes attend the functional programming meetup here in Auckland. My background is that I'm a PhD student at the University of Waikato, with a research focus on using theorem-proving to guarantee the correctness and security properties of blockchain smart contracts. And I'm interested in functional languages in general, especially dependently typed languages. Um, but today I'll be talking about the relatively lighter topic of switching from macOS to NixOS, which is a Linux distribution that has won the hearts of many. NixOS, the so-called purely functional Linux distribution, it's an interesting choice to switch to from macOS or any OS. It has some unique advantages as well as some annoying quirks. Um, and I'll discuss my experience of switching from a MacBook Pro to a Dell, running NixOS for my everyday usage as a computer science PhD student. And I'll also share some thoughts from fellow NixOS users. In my PhD, I work proving properties modeled in a functional language, and the fact that it's a functional language makes them easier to reason about. And similarly, I'd say a NixOS system is easier to reason about due to it being configured entirely declaratively. Um, in terms of operating systems, I used Windows for 4 years of university plus beforehand. I've used macOS I used it for about 1.5 years as a PhD student, and I've used NixOS for just over a year so far. And before using NixOS, I hadn't ever used a Linux distribution as my daily driver before, but I had like dabbled. And so I'll briefly go over why I switched. So I began to use the package manager Nix. So NixOS is an operating system built around this package manager, but the package manager itself can be used on macOS or other Linux distributions as well. And I was curious about using Linux as a like day-to-day operating system, but I wasn't particularly myself impressed with Ubuntu Arch or anything else, as they seemed likely to become tricky to manage if I was trying out different programs, configurations, and setups to make it work for me. I thought those Linux distributions, just like Windows and Mac, would kind of get messy. And my MacBook had gotten messy in the sense that there was a lot on there, like old Haskell stack versions and things that I didn't use anymore, but didn't quite have the time to figure out how best to uninstall. And NixOS offered a unique solution here. All my programs and system configuration can be defined in a text file or two with the ability to easily experiment and roll back if need be. Ideal, I thought. Um, and then the most practical reason for myself was that my personal MacBook had only 256 gigs of storage, and I was running short of space. And my university provided me with a new laptop with more storage, and they were willing to let me install any operating system I liked. So I made the switch. So just a brief overview of NixOS. So on the screen, there's a screenshot of like a small snippet of what's called the Nix store, and also like the grub boot menu. And so Nix is like the purely functional package manager, and NixOS, as I mentioned, is built around this. So it treats packages like values in a purely functional programming language. And these are built by functions that are side effect free, and they never change once built. So packages are stored in the Nix store. So like on the screen, you can see like text live, some text live package is there. And each package's directory name has a hash, begins with a hash of the package's build dependency graph. And this approach results in at least the following benefits. So multiple versions of software can easily coexist, in part because they've got different hashes, and so they end up being at different paths. Dependencies are always complete, so this helps really aiding reproducibility on other machines that are running Nix. You have atomic upgrades and rollbacks. So anytime you upgrade something, it's always possible to just roll back and revert to the previous setup. The package language is a functional language, which is nice. And the garbage collection is so it separates uninstalling a package from actually deleting it. So you can uninstall a package and then once there's no references to that package anymore, then you can garbage collect all of them away. And I might mention more on that later. And also, like, this isn't relevant for me, but multi-user support is quite useful sometimes. It's possible for non-privileged users to basically install packages without interfering with other users. So that can be useful in some contexts. And I'll just also mention, so every time you upgrade your system, it generates a new generation. So on the slide, that's what the list of generations is. And so you can always, assuming you haven't garbage collected, you can roll back to any previous generation, which is very useful when doing upgrades and not worrying about breaking something. You might also notice that I have Windows Boot Manager up there. So I have found it helpful to dual boot for certain Windows specific things. So here are a few key advantages I personally felt the benefit of. So firstly, I mentioned the atomic upgrades and rollbacks. So this results in a really overall stable system. When updating, you can always roll back if you don't like the changes. And I think this is pretty common to NixOS, the updating while working. Sorry, common to Linux in general, but especially on NixOS because of the way that past versions don't interfere with future versions. It's very easy to just upgrade your system and then reboot like almost as fast as normal. It's really easy to safely experiment. I've experimented with the kernel and different things that I normally might have been a lot more hesitant to because I wasn't sure that I would not break something, but simply because I know I can roll back, I am able to tinker with parts of the system that I might not otherwise have had the courage to. You learn more Nix along the way. So normally when you are configuring, I don't know, your DNS or just some other setting on your system, it's using something kind of like specific, like maybe even a GUI or just some kind of configuration file that's very unique to that specific scenario. Whereas with Nix, pretty much everything you do configuration-wise and installing software is in Nix. So you always are learning and upskilling your Nix as you do literally anything. And so this really helps increase your skill set. And the skill set is useful for everything from making developer environments to setting up servers as well that are running NixOS as well. And the declarative aspect of NixOS is, so if things break, they always break in the same way and they can be fixed in the same way. So there's no more, this works on my machine, because if you're on the same Nix channel and have essentially the same config, things will either work identically or fail identically, which is kind of helpful because even if something fails, when someone posts a fix that is applicable to your situation, it will work. And so that's quite useful as well. And it's kind of fun to be using an operating system with a unique paradigm that has some of these unique advantages. And so, yeah, I encourage you to try it and see. There are ways to try it without kind of, reinstalling your operating system. You can try it on AWS. You can try it on a virtual machine as well. Or you can just try the Nix package manager on any Linux or Mac OS. So some annoying quirks that I've come across. So the first one that always comes to my mind is that Oh, that should be /bin/bash, but yeah. So bin bash is not always there by default, and this can cause annoying issues with scripts and things like with shebangs that rely on bin bash in particular and haven't been patched. But there are workarounds, and my Wi-Fi occasionally drops. My sleep on my laptop doesn't behave well, so I now use Hibernate mostly. Zoom screen sharing, this is probably typical of Linux in general, but it only works properly on the XOR system, not Wayland. But I don't know, you get used to these things. And occasionally executables will just kind of work fine, say on Ubuntu, but not on NixOS. And so you have to get used to a little bit of friction sometimes. Yeah, and like when software says like, oh, do you want to update? Like the update prompts like don't really work because you have to always update through NixOS. There are some exceptions to this, like for example, I don't know, like Discord will update itself, but it does depend on the situation. So those are some quirks I've found. I thought I'd also just mention some packages that I've found useful coming from macOS to Linux. So this slide has a few examples of that. And yeah, like macOS, obviously the integration you get between say an iPhone, iPad, and MacBook is never going to be quite matched on any Linux distribution. But I think our brains get pretty adaptive at getting used to workarounds and alternatives. And yeah, web apps are particularly useful. So much good software is just a web app. For example, like Crypty, TickTick, and Google Docs on this slide. And this presentation itself is Google Slides. And yeah, you can make web shortcuts that make it feel like an app anyway. So yeah, just thought I would mention some of these, and pretty much all the content in these slides is also in notes at the end if you are interested. A couple of memes. So the one on the left I got from a blog from Replit. So Replit is an online collaborative browser-based IDE, if you haven't heard of it. And they've, as they put it, jumped on the Nix train. And so you can now like run all sorts of languages through their browser-based IDE, and that's powered by Nix. And yeah, they mentioned how this it worked on my machine and how Nix really helps solve that problem. Another one is on the right from the NixOS subreddit is just poking fun at how the rollbacks are really helpful on NixOS. Yeah, so and there's plenty of interesting memes if you Google NixOS memes. I will admit a lot of them are more negative, like those ones that kind of poke fun at how like Nix can be like a big learning curve sometimes for people. So yeah, that's also part of what people have made memes about. Yeah, and then I wanted to mention as well, so I put a question out a few days ago of just asking the NixOS community what the highlights of daily driving NixOS are on the NixOS forum. And so these are a few highlights I wanted to share, but also feel free to check out the discussion later via the link I'll share. There's some good thoughts there. So one thing that I mentioned earlier about developer environments is, so Nix shell. So this is one of the kind of most practically useful things for developers. And so as with everything on Nix, it's defined by the functional language Nix. And so these shell environments can be used on macOS as well, but also any Linux distro. And basically it defines your set of dependencies, and then you just type Nix shell, so in your specific directory, and it will load all of those dependencies into like interactive bash prompt. And so you can use this to set up all your dependencies for a project, and then you can share this shell.nix file with other people. And when they run it on their machine, they'll have the developer environment just like you. And there's also a lot of, like, it doesn't waste space. So if you have your Nix shell and you have a similar project in a different directory, then you can it'll share all of the content in the Nix store. So basically, it'll install all those programs and make them available within that directory. And so I've used this. For example, I used to work on a project for my PhD. The proof system I use is based around OCaml, and I used to like mess around with OPAM and the switches, and I was finding it quite frustrating when I wanted to switch versions and things like that. And so eventually I switched to using Nix shell for that, and completely replaced OPAM in my workflow. And I found it really beneficial. The user experience was a lot smoother. And I was also then able to, without much effort, automate things like when I was setting up continuous integration, I could just use the same shell.nix to run the tests on GitHub or Travis. So that's really neat. And then, so in terms of reproducibility, this really helps with solving the it works on my machine problem. So basically, this is because every dependency is pinned down to a specific version, and typically there's a hash of the either binary or it's just built from source. And when it's built from source, it's usually cached. So you have the NixOS kind of cache that is online, and you can also enable like custom binary caches as well for your specific team, or like using other people's like projects. And so yeah, this together with Nix shell makes reproducibility really easy for developer environments and building anything. So these are some of the things that were mentioned by other NixOS users. The most common thing mentioned was it's highly recommended to start out with Nix on macOS or Linux first. This is partly because once you switch to NixOS, you kind of can only do things the right way. And so that means that when you are on NixOS and you want to do something like, I don't know, installing a graphics driver, you have to do it through the configuration.nix file, and you have to kind of know how or learn how. So if you want to just get a feel and get a bit of familiarity before switching, then it's, multiple people recommended starting out with Nix, the package manager alone first. And this was my journey as well. I started with Nix on macOS originally. It's really nice that the entire system state is in Git. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but it usually is. And so, just every small configuration change you make to your entire system has comments and a commit history, which is really, really helpful when you're trying to work out why you did something like 6 months ago. And there's no urges to completely reinstall the OS to get out of a mess. So this happened to me a lot. Like when I was on Windows and macOS, I would find myself maybe every 6 months, a year, being like, there's too much random stuff that I can't find or uninstall. I'm just going to reinstall the operating system and start fresh. Whereas with NixOS, you always have a very clear idea of what's on your system. And if you want to change and delete things, it's very, very easy and clear to do that. So this is my own experience, but it's also from someone else who commented on how you feel that there's no need to reinstall the operating system. And a couple more. So with Nix on macOS, this is for someone who doesn't use NixOS but does use Nix. You're able to manage like everything from even apparently homebrew file like installs to DNS to all sorts of system configuration. And so you can go quite far without even installing NixOS in terms of getting the benefits of the kind of declarative way of managing your system. Many people mentioned that NixOS requires learning of the functional language Nix. And Yeah, it does, and it also doesn't. Like a lot of the stuff is very kind of straightforward, but it is a like full-on functional language, so you can go quite far with that. But a lot of the time, it's like you don't need to know too much, to be honest, but it does help. Yeah, some people describe NixOS as indestructible. This is referring to like rollbacks and being able to revert to a previous system state. Yeah, interestingly, I see a parallel here between how in Datomic you can like go back to a like view the database from any point in time. On NixOS, you can basically roll back a system to pretty much any point in time if you want to, which is quite useful. And yeah, it's also a really easy way of showing div environments, assuming the other person's using Nix, but still, like it's definitely very highly likely that you'll get a reproducible development environment set up. And so yeah, so that's some of the benefits there. Yeah. So I wanted to give a brief just demonstration of just the feel of NixOS, and also look at a couple of small code examples. So I guess the first thing I'll mention is that this is GNOME. So I assume you can see. Yeah, you can see. So NixOS works with GNOME as well as KDE. So these are different desktop desktop managers, if you're not aware of them. So like, and the experience is very fluid, I guess is my main point here, is that this is kind of like Mac, but you can also alt tab in like different ways. And so it's pretty nice. You can run all your favorite programs like VS Code and so on, except the like 2 proprietary Windows and Mac specific ones. But yeah, and then so this here is my home.nix file. So this kind of defines all of the programs on my system. And so as you can see, I've got random comments about all sorts of different things that I wouldn't say this is a particularly clean home.nix file, but I'm just giving you a real world example. So this is the Nix language as well. So everything that ends with .nix is going to be the Nix language. And so we have like, you can't quite see the other side of this bracket, but there's a list. So we have lists, we have if statements, although I don't think there's any in this file. And you can do things like have Python packages installed, and you can override packages as well. This is quite neat. So I've got Firefox here and I've overridden it so that it works better with my touchscreen. And this just gives you a brief idea. And like, so if I wanted to uninstall Chromium, for example, I would simply delete it from this file. And then I would type, well, in my case, I've got a little script for it, but I would just type .rebuild. And all rebuild does is call home manager to like rebuild it. So these are like fine details, but the idea is that like to uninstall something, you just delete it rather than like kind of actively uninstall it. You just redefine the system state and then reload that state. Yeah, and so that's quite practically useful. And all of these here are defined by pinned back to a specific version. And in my system, this is pinned back to what's called the Nix channel, but there's a newer version which is called Nix Flakes, which has kind of this notion of everything being pinned down within your Nix files to a specific version, even more precisely than what I have here. So this gives some understanding of the Nix system. You can also configure like settings as well. So here, for example, I have the default applications to open different types of documents, and so there's a lot you can configure. It's not just programs, but it's also yeah, things in your home directory and like dot files and so on. And so yeah, so that's all possible with Nix. And then in terms of NixOS, so the main file for so that's kind of what I just showed you there. You can do all of that on Linux or Mac. What I'm showing you here is more specific to NixOS, where you're actually kind of controlling the operating system itself. So in the configuration.nix files, where you define how the system is configured as a whole, and you can put programs in this file, but you don't have to. So and every time you update this file, that's what generates the generations from in the boot menu, which is kind of unique as well. I do want to highlight that. So like typically when you have a installation, you have say dual boots, you've got your Linux install, your Windows install. So on NixOS you have like literally hundreds of potentially of generations of NixOS, and they're all bootable. And then you also might have your Windows install, and maybe if you want an Ubuntu as well or something. So yeah, so that's quite neat. And so like here you can see that I have to like enable OpenGL 32-bit, and this is so that I could try run Steam. And by the way, this is part of the reason why I installed Windows. But yeah, so it is possible to run games on NixOS. It is, but nowhere near as nicely as Windows, of course. But yeah, like I did also experiment with virtualization. So you can use Docker, you can use VirtualBox, and these things work pretty smoothly, as you would imagine. And yeah, so that's kind of how long the file is. So it's not terribly long. Yeah, so I just thought I would just mention those things. I will also highlight, this is, so recently I deleted a lot of my old generations because they take up a lot of storage space, as you might imagine. And so when you have these generations of your operating system, it's kind of like updating a operating system, but keeping all of the files needed for the old one, right? And so it takes up a lot of space. And I freed up like 150 gigs or something by deleting all the old generations. And that's something you also have to get your head around. Like, it's not always entirely obvious how to save space, and these things, like the best practices, are not entirely obvious sometimes. But there's reasonably good documentation for these things. Yeah. So that was basically everything I wanted to mention. One other thing I'll mention is that, which I can't really show you, but is that it works pretty fine on a touchscreen. So yeah, as I said, I normally use Wayland, and that's a pretty smooth experience. I haven't tried a pen device, but yeah, these things are interesting to experiment with. I did also want to mention, let me just see if I can, oops. Yeah, so like there are also, of course, things like if statements, and being able to declare like different, yeah, there's lots of content out there. I just wanted to kind of show off that it is a function language with like let expressions and if expressions, and just to give a very brief glimpse of it, though I wouldn't call myself an absolute expert on that yet. Although, I mean, you learn as you go. So yeah. So yeah, so that is pretty much everything I had to say. The parting comment that I have is that it is very beneficial in many ways. At the same time, though, it can be time consuming. So it does depend on whether you have the time to sort of invest in finding out and learning the language and all of the effort that goes into that. But it does pay off. So it's kind of like reasonably high investment, but I would say reasonably high reward as well. So I do encourage you to try it out. And next slide. Pardon me. Okay, and yeah, so I encourage you to check it out if you are interested. And I have a link here which has basically all the notes related to my slides. And so also nixos.org is the website to actually download it and give it a try. So thank you very much for having me. And yeah, feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Thank you. Yeah, we actually do have some questions, Daniel. First, where should I shoot? Start here. Nix language. Hi, I think I read that Nix language is based on Haskell. Is it so?
Good question. Yeah, I think as far as I know, it's certainly a functional language. And so I think it has been influenced by Haskell. I don't know specifically if it is particularly closely related to Haskell in particular. I do know that one thing I wanted to mention was that part of the story behind NixOS is that it did kind of come out of a PhD thesis of someone at some point. And it was kind of, that was a key factor in like making it a real possibility, which is quite interesting for an operating system to come out of a thesis. But yeah, I don't know specifically about how it relates to Haskell, but definitely as a functional language, it's related in some way.
Yep. Thanks. Next question. Did you consider using Quirks SD when choosing NixOS?
I have definitely heard of Quirks. I don't want to say anything bad about Quirks because I haven't really tried it myself. I think that NixOS broadly is, I don't know how to, like slightly more user friendly in a way. And yeah, but yeah. So I feel like Quirks would be a bigger step to jump into than to just jump into NixOS.
Yep.
Yeah.
Next questions. A guy asking about, I guess. Thank you for your presentation. Any suggestion, guidance for configuring multiple external monitors?
Well, for me personally, I've used it with multiple external monitors without any hiccups at all. This might be because of, it might be because I use GNOME, that it works without too many hiccups. I haven't, yeah, so like at university, I have two external monitors and it just works fine and I can rearrange them as fine. So it might just be a GNOME thing that works fine. But if you're using a different setup, sorry, I don't know myself.
No, no, that's fine. It's okay. Next question. You mentioned that you do your configuration files in Nix language. Can you describe how you would go about writing example your .bash hrc file in Nix? Or is that little bit what you showed? You showed a bit of configuration in the end.
Yeah, I currently don't do. I think I might be able to show.
Yeah, do it.
If I have. The closest thing I have to configuring is just setting up like a few aliases. So I don't know if this quite relates, but I don't personally customize like a bash RC file too much. This is the closest here that I come to sort of configuring anything in general with my bash. Yeah. But yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of ways to do it. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another question. I mean, do you think you're more productive using NixOS compared to macOS or Windows? in your daily work?
I think I am now. Certainly, there were say the first month or two. It was a lot of change. A lot of that, though, was not specific to NixOS. It was also just the switch from Mac to Linux in general. But yeah, I think now I do definitely reap the benefits of being on NixOS in particular. It makes my life a lot easier, and also have a lot less, like, for example, like concern that my system is just getting out of control, and like I always know that I can put it in exactly the state I would like to.
Yes. Well, I don't have any more questions, and I don't see any more questions in the chat. So thank you very much. Very nice presentation. Thank you very much. I'll give you get an applause from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for watching and following us today. We will be back in approximately a month on the 15th of March. Then we run at 18 set. We currently have one presenter, so if you're interested to present or have a friend that should present something they know, you think they should present, please get in contact with me or get your friend to get in contact with me. You find me on most of the social media, so just pop over and say hi and we'll put you on stage. With that said, thank you everyone for watching tonight, and goodbye.